Hey, 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 it's Chuck Dixon back again to talk about what it is I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. And I am here to answer your questions, one and all. And I'd appreciate it, though, if you like this video, well, let the world know. Click the old like button, doesn't cost you a dime. Lets other people on YouTube know that you enjoyed the video, and maybe they might enjoy it too. So there you go. Join the party. All right, first question. Rick Smallwood. How do you make time for all that you do? You write novels and comic books, watch and review movies, make and entertain us with videos. Are you clones? Um, no, I'm not clones. Uh, I, I just manage my time well. In fact, if you knew all of the stuff that's like, you know, in the box, already done, that hasn't even been published yet, you'd be even more surprised. But I use one very simple tool to help me manage my time, and it looks like this. It's just a calendar. I stay way ahead of deadline. More on that to come in answer to another question. But I stay way ahead of deadline. I don't treat. I don't even look at publisher deadlines. I look at my own deadlines. You know, based on a number of factors, like how quickly do I want to get this job done? How enthusiastic am I? Can I get on a roll and finish this job months ahead of schedule? Can I complete an entire mini series that an artist might spend a year on before the artist even begins? And by doing this, it keeps my plate clear. I'm always ahead of schedule. I'm always keeping a whole bunch of artists busy, and I stay well ahead of them. So that if I am asked to do something special or different, or I want to squeeze in a novel, uh, writing a novel, I mean, then I have the time. And I've run my career like this from the beginning because I never want to say no to an interesting job that might come up. I never want to say no to a job that I might love doing because I'm too far behind on my other work. So yeah, you might hate me, but I was one of those kids who did his homework, his holiday homework, as soon as he got home from school, the first day of Christmas break, because I didn't want to have to think about it. And I'm still the same way. Deadlines are homework, and I like to get them out of the way as much as possible. So that's how I seem to accomplish so much, because I leave myself the time to do so. So I never get writer's block or flummoxed or, any other um, reasons for not producing work. And I'm a workaholic. As I grow older, writing becomes more compulsive. I didn't imagine it would be that way. I thought eventually I would burn out, but I haven't burned out. I really enjoy it. My enthusiasm level has risen, if anything, for the work that I do. And thank you all for your support in doing that because you make that possible. Thanks so much. Jeff Carrero, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Jim Shooter wrote Legion when he was just a teenager. Do you think it's possible to find talented comic writers without experience or training who could jump in and be effective? Yeah, I mean, you just have to love the medium, right? You just have to love comics. That's the main requirement. The second requirement is you have the burning desire to tell a story. And writing isn't like art where you have to go to school and there's a level of training and everything else. I mean, if you think a story, you start thinking of stories and start writing them down, you can do that right away. And that's what, kids do. They think of stories, they play pretend. And that's a lot of what comics are about. I mean, most comic books, we're talking about superhero comic books here, are childish wish fulfillment books. What if I was that big, strong guy and I could push the bully around? Or I could make my parents let me stay up late. So a lot of it begins that way. And that is where we begin telling story when we play pretend. Um, we're imagining things in our head. We're creating scenarios for the play that we do or that we did as a kid. And, that's what Superman and Batman are, and every other superhero. They're a childish wish fulfillment fantasy. It's no accident that Superman and Batman were created by teenagers. Siegel and Schuster were, young kids. Bob Kane and Bill Finger were probably still in high school. I don't recall, but these were young guys who created these, and they I think they were fresh blood in the comic book industry. I mean, it was just beginning, it was at its dawn, but these guys were the fresh blood the business needed. Instead of using, newspaper men and pulp writers who were slumming in comics, who really weren't into the medium at all. Um, you know, so they were professionals, but they weren't enthusiastic professionals. And here come these kids who are dying to work in this medium. They're excited by it, and they revitalize, and basically give birth to the comic book, or at least they're handmaidens to the comic book. You know, um, unlike Carl Barks, who was a professional working man, a gag writer, a writer, who jumped at comics because they offered him a level of creative freedom he didn't get as an animator. So you could say that Carl Barks is full of childish enthusiasm as well, even though he was not a child when he began writing comics and basically creating the comic book writing form. So yeah, I wandered all over the place there, didn't I? But yeah, you need new blood in comics. Now you got Jack Kirby, who revitalized the business a couple of times. Um, he did excellent work at DC that was best selling and grabbed the imagination before he went off to fight in Europe in World War II. When he returned, he and Joe Simon created the most popular comic book genres of the early 50s. They created the horror comic, the war comic, the crime comic, the romance comic, and these carried comics through the 50s. And of course, he was, the keystone of the Marvel Age of Comics, revitalized Marvel. Now, how did he do this? How did a grown man do this? He's not a teenager. Well, he was. I mean, Jack Kirby never grew up. And I mean that in the best way possible. He never grew up. He never lost that adolescent enthusiasm for fairy tale, for story, for saga. And he loved these characters, and he obviously loved the medium. He spent his life in it. He spent his life transforming it. And if he's ever spoken to Kirby, he spoke with a great deal of enthusiasm, both positive and negative. He was very opinionated about comics. He was as big a geek as you and me about comics, which is why he was able to create the kind of work that he did. The mojo was there on the page. Steve Ditko as well. Steve Ditko is sort of the darker side of adolescence. Someone, who's going to, stubborn. You remember when you were a kid, how stubborn you could be? Well, that was Steve Ditko. And, but again, he created Spider-Man and Doctor Strange out of a kind of, adolescent wish fulfillment. And I'm not saying these men were childish or anything like that. They were anything but. These were, high functioning working professionals, but they never let go of that part of them that liked to pretend. And they were earnest about their work and earnest about their pretend. And both men were wells of imagination, bottomless wells of imagination. And that's the kind of thing that comics always need. They need a fresh infusion of this kind of guy or gal, whatever it is. And we haven't seen that in a while. We really haven't seen any new blood in the major comic book publishers. It's the same people producing them now that were producing them 20 years ago, 25 years ago, even 30 years ago. And that's a problem. There's no new major talent. Every once in a while, a hot new artist will come along and burn bright for a while. But the artist isn't going to change the industry. You need the artist writer or the writer. You need the creator. The guy's going to think of new ideas, not just interpret someone else's. And we haven't seen that in a while. We also haven't seen any firebrand publishers in a while that are willing to bend the rules, try new stuff, and trust in their talent to create excellent work. And there is a problem for freelancers. This is a bit of a cautionary tale. It's a little bit away from the subject of the question, but enthusiasm is good if you're a comic book creator, obviously. Enthusiasm can be bad. Publishers will use your enthusiasm against you. I mean, if an editor, comic book editor, who you don't know and don't trust, asks you what character you've always wanted to work on, never tell them, because they will hold that over you. And in most cases, will never let you work on that character, because that's a power they have over you, that they can hold that carrot out to get you to do other stuff, to do them favors, which they will never remember, to work harder, to whatever, you know. And this is a certain brand of editor, not every editor. But unfortunately, most editors in comics today are this way. They don't remember when you do them a favor. They do remember to use you. And enthusiasm, your own enthusiasm, can be a weapon against you. It's happened to me. It's happened to any other creator that you care to talk to. Ask them if they've ever paid for their enthusiasm, and they will tell you that they did at some point. So watch out. Hide your light under a bushel. Keep your geek behind curtains when you're dealing in the professional comic book publishing world. Peter Collinson says, "Hey Chuck, I recall there are a couple other spaghetti westerns based on novels. One that springs to mind is The Ugly Ones, a pretty solid Thomas Millian vehicle based on Marvin Albert's 1958 gold medal original novel, The Bounty Killer. The book's better, but the movie's fun, has a fine full-blooded spaghetti western score by Stelvio Cipriani. As long as I'm taking up space, I'd like to ask you to tell us a couple of your other favorite non-Leone spaghettis." I really like Run Man Run, another Thomas Millian movie, directed by Sergio Salima, who was the third Sergio in spaghetti westerns. There's Sergio Leone, of course, and Sergio Corbucci, and Sergio Salima. And the three of them made the best spaghetti westerns. They all happen to be named Sergio. Run Man Run is a sequel to The Big Gun Down, also with Thomas Millian, but it was a Lee Van Cleef vehicle. It's a very good Western, also directed by Sergio Salima. And we meet Cachillo, who the Millian character, who continues on in Run Man Run without Lee Van Cleef. But both movies are really good, just beautifully photographed, well paced, just solid Western entertainment. Another favorite of mine is The Mercenary. And it's basically Franco Nero plays a Polish guy who shows up in revolutionary Mexico, picks out Tony Mazzante, who's like, a Slav bandito, and uses his wiles and a huge treasure trove of ammunition and weaponry to elevate Mazzante to a position of power in northern Mexico. It's a fun movie. And here we go. It's Sergio Corbucci. Sergio Corbucci was a confirmed communist, and here he deals with a lot of the mercurial nature of revolution, which of course a communist would understand better than anyone else. It's one of the few films Corbucci made that showed the price of revolution. His revolutionaries in his movies and his outlaws in his movies are always victorious and fighting for the little guy. Here, Corbucci's a little more cynical about all of that. It also features Jack Palance as a really creepy um, uh, fellow mercenary sent to hunt down Franco Nero. But it's a fun movie with a bit of a message and lots of Mexican Revolutionary era action. And I'm just a sucker for that period. Now, The Ugly Ones, which you mentioned, another Thomas Millian vehicle, it's a good movie, and it's obvious from the way it's structured that it was based on a novel rather than the usual let's make it up as we go along that you often find in spaghetti westerns. And it has an American actor in it whose name I cannot recall, Richard Weiler. Richard Weiler, American actor who's barely known here in the United States, did a bunch of TV, but he was quite a sensation in Italy for a while making westerns. And he's got that, stolid American tough guy attitude that works perfectly. And the ugly ones of the title are, it's an ugly bunch. It's a creepy bunch of guys who are Thomas Milan's gang members, and it's kind of like a a Randolph Scott Western in that it mostly takes place outdoors and it takes place around a single setting, which is cool, as the bounty hunter hunting for the bandit Thomas Milan. The two of them, switch places uh, in supremacy over one another. A little cat and mouse game around this remote. Um, I don't know what it is. It's like a remote settlement out in the middle of the desert. So, but it's really cool. And as Peter said, it is based on a gold medal novel, paperback novel by Marvin H. Alpert. Gold medal westerns, for my money, were the best westerns ever written consistently. Whoever edited these books was a genius because he invariably picked solid material, which I will get into with the very next question. Tom Barnes says, recently you mentioned Gordon D. Sheriff and extolled his descriptive writing. That's Sheriff's. Other than comic book writers, please elaborate on authors or even screenwriters that you are fond of who may have honed and refined your writing. Please tell us why you like them. And if I can sneak in another question, are you a fan of Louis L'Amour? I will answer your last question first. No, I'm not a fan of Louis L'Amour. I find his stories to be rather the same all the time, and I find his lead characters extremely uninteresting. They are, iconic Western heroes to me in the worst sense of the word. They have no flaws. There's nothing interesting about them to me. Um, yeah, I don't, I know he's extremely popular worldwide. I mean, Louis L'Amour is like a hallmark, a benchmark in Western fiction. I just don't care for him. And I've read dozens of them. And my dad had tons of them around the house. And I ended up reading dozens of them. But he grew bored with them after a while. And I grew bored with them even quicker. Um, I'm not going to go into every author I like because there's no time, but I may make that a regular feature here. I may revisit that in future Ask Chuck Dixon's without prompting. So just pick an author and talk a little bit about them. But I will talk about some Western authors that I like, and I will go into a little more about Gordon D. Sheriffs and why I like him. Sheriffs wrote for every major paperback publisher back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and his work was often tapped for movies and things like that. But um, he wrote with an authority. He wrote with an authenticity about cavalry and especially Indians, Native Americans. He was terrific at writing that kind of stuff about his Indians were believable. They were never stilted or one-dimensional. Um, and a lot of Western writers muff that one. They don't make their Indians believable or seem real, and he did. But he was unblinking in his regard for them because he would. I'm skipping ahead here. He would show you the cruel side of them as well. So another writer I really like, Western writer Claire Huffaker. Much like Sheriff's, he wrote for every publisher and was very, very prolific. And again, very authentic. Everything he wrote about, from weaponry to saddlery to horsemanship to locations, all very had a feel of a guy who'd been there. And I like Sheriff's, wrote terrific dialogue. He's a very successful writer. He wrote a number of episodes of Lawman, the TV show Lawman, in the early 60s. And I rewatched the entire series recently, I mean, over like a year-long period. And I was always able to pick out his episodes, Claire Huffaker's episodes, before the episode was over, because the writing credit would be at the end. I always say, yeah, this was a Claire Huffaker because the plotting was lean, the characters were interesting, the situation was suspenseful, and the resolution was absolutely dead perfect, and the dialogue was authentic, had a feeling of authenticity to me, and I was never wrong. I picked out all 18 episodes that he wrote without fail just by watching them. But he not only paperbacks, he wrote the Comancheros was turned into a movie. His novel The War Wagon, another John Wayne feature. Hollywood tapped this guy quite a bit for ideas. because he lived in both worlds. He was a Hollywood writer as well as a paperback writer. But his absolute classic, if he never wrote another book, he'd be remembered for this one by Western fans, The Cowboy and the Cossack. It's a epic novel, and I mean epic with a capital E, that deals with a cattle drive across Tsarist Siberia. Um, there's a beef shortage at a fort in Siberia that's surrounded by Tartars. It's under siege, and a, a Cossack is tasked with meeting a shipment of Texas Longhorns coming in at Vladivostok and helping the cowboys drive them across Siberia in winter. I mean, if you don't want to read this after that description, you don't have any blood in your veins. It is high adventure, high action, again, written with Claire Huffaker's sense of authenticity, and the climactic battle between the cowboys and the Cossacks and the Tartars is unforgettable. This movie has been in continuous option by Hollywood since the 70s when it was first published. And it's never been made into a film. And it's a shame because this would have been an absolutely epic Western. I hope that someday somebody gets around to doing a worthy film version of this because it's begging for it. But find yourself a copy. It's always seems to be in publication somewhere, either in Kindle or in print, or find an old paperback like this. You will not be sorry. Even if you're not a Western fan, you will not be sorry. Okay, we're going to get to the last of the cowboy writers I like. John Benteen is my ultimate. John Benteen, again, authenticity, all the rest of it. He wrote a series of books. Well, his actual name was Ben Haas, but he wrote under the name John Benteen a lot. And he wrote the series called Fargo. And it was very much, the character was a gun runner working the Mexican border and Central America, and he even makes it down to Argentina at one point. And he's very much based on the Lee Marvin character from the movie The Professionals. He's in that period, 1915 to 1917. And what I like about Benteen's writing is the way he handles action. He handles action. I mean, there's three guys that I look to for action, and they couldn't be more different. That's Ben Haas or John Benteen, Cormac McCarthy, and Edgar Rice Burroughs. Those are the three go-to guys for an action scene for me. These guys, because action is very hard for some writers, so they stray away from it. And Benteen just wallowed in it. He just wrote tremendous, multi-layered, multifaceted action scenes. The action was always clear, concise, and effective. I mean, you felt every punch. You bled along with the men who were shot. The guy could write a horse chase, and it was exciting on the page. I mean, that's an incredible amount of talent. And he wrote under a lot of different names, and he wrote again with a lot of authenticity, particularly about range wars. I love his books that involve cattle and fighting over water rights and things like that. He wrote a lot of that kind of stuff, and just the sense that he'd fired those guns and he'd ridden across that land. His descriptive verse and everything was terrific, and he was a very prolific writer. So I imagine that Ben Haas was an extremely intelligent man because of his use of language. It was always varied, and his plots were always interesting. I mean, they were good, solid Western plots, but all the nuances were there to make you keep turning the pages. And his characters were vivid and relatable, if sometimes not necessarily likable. So there you go. And I will get to other authors in the future, but those are my three favorite Western authors. Nick C. Which is the preferred DC superhero cola of choice, soda or zesty? I don't know when this started, but DC in the 90s, we began to fill the universe with imaginary products and restaurant chains and store chains and things like that. Kind of stuff I love because I love logistics in a comic and I love creating, and building this imaginary world. I even wrote a miniseries, a Cyber Rats miniseries involving a war between these two cola companies, battling over the secret formula for soda cola, very much like the real battles, the real world battles between Coke and Pepsi, which if you ever get a chance to read about that, it's fascinating. Those two companies went at one another in sometimes extraordinarily mean ways in court and outside of court. But yeah, we created, my favorite was O'Shaughnessy's, which was a fast food chain with a lot of Irish wordplay. And they had a leprechaun mascot. And O'Shaughnessy's comes from a pseudonym that Denny O'Neil used when he wrote paperback novels. Uh, he used the name Sergius O'Shaughnessy. If you ever look at old issues of Richard Dragon Kung Fu Fighter, you'll see that Denny O'Neil writing the comics based them on novels written by Sergius O'Shaughnessy, in other words, written by himself. But there were other chains. I can remember created a Walmart type store. I remember creating a department store chain for Gotham City, things like that. All that stuff was so much fun to do. Like there was another a hamburger chain in Nightwing that was based. I can't remember what it was, but it was all about explosives. It was, I don't know if it was Dynamite Burger or TNT Burger, and all of their menu were referred to blasts and explosions and eruptions. All that stuff was fun to write. Mike Wood says, "Hey Chuck, when you are writing a character, how do you approach it? Do you think of the best of a person or the worst of them? How do you get inside a character's head?" Well, let's go to Batman. Batman, to a lot of people, may seem kind of one note. He's dark and brooding and heroic. He always does the right thing. And there you go. You leave it there. But you don't, because Batman's a very nuanced character if you really look at him hard. Yeah, there's many sides to him. Yeah, he's brooding and he's a badass and he's tough and he's indefatigable. Once Batman's on your case, you're screwed, right? And but then he's sad because he lost his parents, so he's got that promise that he can make. But he's never silly. Batman doesn't make jokes. Batman has a sense of humor, but it's rarely shown. Okay. So anyway, so the badass part and the brooding and the sad, it makes him all relatable. And those are like good things, because he feels human emotion. He feels grief over his parents. He feels a dedication to the promise he made to them. He's heroic because he goes into battle fearlessly to fight crime and protect innocent citizens of Gotham. Those are all the good things. And to really understand a character, you have to embrace the good and the bad. Well, what's the bad about Batman? He can be a little abusive. He can be a little demanding to those around him. You got to be on the case with him. You got to be 100% into the crusade. He's not as bad as the Punisher in this aspect, but let's face it, this guy recruits adolescents to be his sidekicks, basically people he can push around. And he takes all kinds of advantage of Alfred because Alfred, much like Bruce has promised to avenge his parents, Alfred has made an oath to stick by Bruce, no matter what, hell or high water. And very often, at least when I was writing it, Bruce Wayne would take advantage of that oath quite a bit. And Alfred would grumble and make his little, snide remarks, but he'd still be there. So there's that side of him that he's driven, and that drive makes him sometimes humorless and unforgiving. He's also a very suspicious guy. He does not like to think that anybody has a one up on him. He is into gamesmanship. And one of the things that was introduced in the 90s that I loved, it wasn't introduced by me, it was mostly explored by Kelly Puckett, just an awesome writer working the same time I was working there. And Kelly dove into Batman's distrust of Superman because Superman is not human. And also his distrust of Superman because Superman has practically godlike powers. And Bruce thought, well, this guy could go off the beam at any time. And, what's to stop Superman from becoming a villain? And how would we stop it? So Batman was always thinking of ways, in the 90s version to counter Superman, which is kind of, you know, villainous in itself, isn't it? I mean, he's trying to stay one step ahead of, the world's mightiest hero. And we all know, Superman's a Boy Scout. He always means well. But Batman is like, I don't buy it. So there you go. You got the heroic side, the human side of Batman shown through his grief and brooding, and his loyalty. But then you've got the abusiveness, the sort of self centeredness to his mission that sometimes others have to suffer for, and his constant suspicion of others around him, which, makes him a well rounded character. There's a reason why he's around. It's not just because he has a cool costume and a neat cave and a cool car. There's a reason we're fascinated with him because of all of those elements that have come out over the years as he's been developed as a character and that we all know about instinctively. But I've just articulated them for you because I have to, because I'm a writer. Because when you write a character, you've got to think about this stuff hard and articulate it and keep it all in mind when you're writing. So there, I've taken a character everybody loves and examined for you how I got into it, how I got into his head as a writer as opposed to a reader. Because just like you, I love Batman, but that's not enough. Well, when the editor says, okay, what's he going to do? What's the story about? Interest me, engage me, tell me more. So there you go. Orson Welles, love that. What is the story of how Arkhaven Comics came to be and what is planned for the future? Well, Arkhaven Comics grew out of another publishing house called Castalia House, which publishes novels. And mostly it was the brainchild of Vox Day. And yeah, that's the usual reaction to Vox Day. Yeah, Vox Day, international man of mystery, who's an author in his own right, publisher, entrepreneur, musician, game designer. Wine snob. Uh, he's now into bookbinding. There's nothing this guy doesn't succeed at when he turns his mind to it. And he reached out to me to join his merry band to do basically a comic book imprint called Arkhaven. And mostly he just said, I need a lot of content and we've got a lot of ideas and we want to explore different avenues of delivering comics to readers worldwide. You know, total thinking outside the box. And he also offered me, autonomy, complete creative freedom. So the first thing I got to work with on him was this book Avalon, which is sort of a spin-off from his Alt Hero series. It takes place in the fictional New Jersey city of Avalon, and it gave me an opportunity to create my own Gotham and create my own world of superheroes that wasn't tied to any long publishing history. I wasn't tied to any continuity. I was creating the continuity as I went along. So I didn't have to worry about illusion of change. I could warp and bend and change and do whatever I wanted to these characters, unlike when I worked on established superheroes. And I dove in with both feet. I know, I think there's only 5 or 6 issues out. All 12 issues of what was proposed as a maxi series have been completed. The art's done, everything else. I saw coloring on issue 12 just the other day. So the rest of the series is in the pipeline coming along. But it's a lot of fun to work on, working on my own superheroes, creating my own situations and scenarios, and also creating a 12-issue story, with a beginning, middle, and end. And I hope to return to the universe at some point. But Fox keeps throwing other stuff at me. We're looking at doing a comic book app, much like Webtoons, and I'm doing a number of projects for that. The first of it one is Go Monster Go. And Go Monster Go is a kind of throwback retro 1960s Roger Corman movie. Kind of hot rod kids meet ghosts and monsters and aliens. Artwork by Tim Lottie, and it, it this is a lot of fun to work on. I mean, it's got a werewolf, it's got alien invaders, it's got an army base out in the middle of the California desert doing crazy experiments, and there's a good deal of humor in it. But it's kind of Big Daddy Ed Roth meets Roger Corman kind of thing, and lots of hot rod action with teenage guys and gals, and just a lot of retro fun, early '60s fun, and Tim's bringing it, as you can see from the artwork, and it's been a lot of fun to work on. And my design is that it's an ongoing digital comic that you can read on your phone that I intend to have go on for years and years and years. I've got tons of ideas for this. Another series I'm working on spins out of Alt Hero. Christopher McCullough and I working on The Shade. And The Shade is, to put it briefly, he's kind of a Euro Batman, and he's, like I said, Batman is abusive and can be a bit of a bastard. The Shade is a total bastard. he's a he's a European aristocrat with a mad on for a lot of people because he feels like his family was done harm by the European Union, and there's a lot of stuff going on. It's a lot of fun to write. It's a character created by Vox, but I've kind of adopted him and taken him over. And it's very much a Batman and Robin kind of story with a Euro twist and a Euro crime twist. There's a lot of art crime and stuff like that. And it gets really, really wild at the end. I've written 4 issues. Artwork's being done on the 3rd one. So you should begin seeing issues soon as we put more and more in the can. I'm also doing a lot of adaptation work. Here I'm adapting some of Vox Day's fantasy work into comic form, and it's gorgeous. And I'm not really that into fantasy, but I do like Vox's fantasy. It's well thought out, it's interesting, it's engaging, and as you can see, a lot of it is set in a sort of Roman Empire kind of universe, which I dig a whole lot. Also working on QAnon, kind of a James Bond character. Roland Dane is a kind of James Bond character who works as an operative, an actual agent for Q, the mysterious internet presence that is into conspiracy theories of all kind that often eerily come true. But Roland Dane is a former Treasury agent, tough guy, and he is working to uncover some currency crimes happening in Europe, as well as a missing shipment of nuclear grade plutonium from North Korea. And it's high adventure stuff. I guess you'd call it Tom Clancy kind of world, but there's a lot of humor, and it gets a bit brutal at times. In fact, a lot more brutal than Vox is comfortable with. My comics tend to be just a little bit more violent than he's comfortable with, which I kind of enjoy that. Also working with my buddy Richard Bonk for a series at Arkhaven that, again, it adapts another fantasy writer's work. If you've read the work, you probably recognize it from these images, but I'm not going to tell you what it is because we haven't announced it. But Richard and I are pals, and he's doing some awesome work here. The work of his comic book career on this title, and it'll be a 6-issue miniseries, probably to be announced soon. I'm also working on another digital comic called Something Big with Frank Fosco, and this is like early days. We've really just begun on it, and this is some early panels and sketches and concept work. It's an alien invasion story. It takes place 30 years after an alien invasion, and the human race has kind of gotten used to the fact we lost the space war, and we're just going to have to live with these creeps. And takes place in Las Vegas in the Nevada desert. And it's actually ultimately a heist story. I hope you're intrigued by that. I would be. A science fiction heist story. Okay. Hey, if you like any of these projects I'm talking about at Arkhaven, you can support them at what I fondly call the Chuck Dixon Slush Fund. If you go to Patreon and look at Archaven Comics, this account is entirely for the to be used for the production of a lot of the artwork you saw, particularly digital projects that are coming up. And I am working on other stuff. Vox and I have a huge epic horror thing we're doing that we're just in the early stages of. But several episodes have been produced for the phone app. So I'm going to be digging into that as well. So Vox is keeping me busy. So yeah, if you want to stop by Patreon, Archaven Comics, $1, $3, $5, whatever, to add to the slush fund to pay the artists to keep us going, so I can keep producing new material. And as always, if you have questions, queries, statements, and remarks, you can send them directly to brunobookstore@gmail.com, and they will be included in a future Ask Chuck Dixon. Of course, you can ask a question right under this video in the comments section. I look at them as well, or see me on Facebook. But the most direct route is to go to brunobookstore@gmail.com and drop your question off there. Thanks for listening. Hope some of you found this edifying, and I will see you down the road.